That's a bigger Varenyam, Vargo Devasya, Mahi, Dio Yola, Prachodayam, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namaste and warm welcome from the guest speaker, Justice Jody Pandit, the legal fraternities, sister organizations, all that have joined us online and our physical activities, all protocols observed. I am Pandit and I will be recording that today. We will start with some highlights of the year for our office time, that is in months of Africa. This year has truly been one of celebration, emotion, and growth for the artists of South Africa. We began with this milestone, the consecration of this day Monday on the 23rd of February at our artists of headquarters, with the blessings of our guest of honor, Swami Shraddha from Pandit. Soon after, on the 29th of March, our grand 100th anniversary celebration was held at the Gujarati Hindu Sanskriti Kendra, placed by Swami Pandit and an esteemed panel of thought leaders, culminating in the keynote address by the ambassadors to this brigade. April brought about the majestic Babu Kuriaja at today's Power Arya Samaj, where over 40 hours witnessed that has come having. Okay. And this story was making and this to that fancy. As the year progressed, our affiliates from very happy the Arya Samaj Portuguese celebrated their 64th anniversary in July and this one party of the battle to the while Arya Samaj survey hosted a successful Mahayatra later that same month. August brought more highlights within the 9 Vedic Centers fundraiser in collaboration with Arya Samaj for Chitston, followed by a vibrant Krishna Asami function at our Arya Samaj headquarters on the 10th of August. The sacred program has made all the more special for the Shavani renewal of vows by our priests and the symbolic time of Rakhis. Looking ahead, there is much more to anticipate in the months to come. On the 4th of October, our annual Diwali celebration will be hosted in conjunction with the Veda Dharma Sabha in Bangalore and the Arya Samaj Clinics. Shortly thereafter, from the 10th to the 12th of October, we will once again proudly participate in the Durban Diwali festival organized by the South African Hindu Mahasabha. We encourage all members who are able to lend a hand with the stall to connect with our administration staff and be part of this collective effort. In addition, the Heal Foundation, under the leadership of Divesh Kasiram, will be bringing light to the inmates of Western Correctional Services with their Diwali celebrations, while Arya Samaj Outing will also be hosting a Diwali program of their own. To conclude October's festivities, the Veda Dharma Sabha Hawi will mark their 55th anniversary on the 25th of October, a true testament to dedication across 3 generations. Alongside these events, our School of Vedic Studies and our educational efforts continue to flourish. The School of Vedic Studies welcomed both its yearly and the year intake of students. Just last week, we launched our new letter course. This 3-month program equips individuals with the knowledge and practice to perform simple hagans in their homes. And we are delighted to share that approximately 70 students from across the country have already registered. Truly, 2025 has been a year of remarkable achievements, and with the months ahead, we look forward to continuing on this path of service, learning, and spiritual upliftment together. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the highlights for the year that's passed and what we have to look forward to. Continuing with the program, we have a video presentation of Pandit Nardev. Over to Samani.
Welcome back to Sadhana. Pandit Nardev Vedalankar was born in Gujarat, India. After coming to South Africa in the 1940s, he discovered that the Hindi language was not being systematically promoted. With the assistance of the Arya Pratinidhi Sabha of South Africa and the Sanatan Dharma Sabha of South Africa, Panditji formed the Hindi Shiksha Sangh in 1948. Today, the Sangh is responsible for preserving the Hindi language in South Africa, a legacy left behind by the revered Panditji Nardev.
Those that came to countries like South Africa, Mauritius, Trinidad, Fiji, were basically disempowered. They did not know about the culture. They were mainly concerned with earning a livelihood. Eating out a livelihood, and they were totally disempowered in matters of the culture. Now, I'm talking here specifically of the indentured labor. Now, somehow along the way, the Indian government, by the various emissaries that went to these colonies, were given a feedback that there were large numbers of conversions taking place. So there was particularly driven project to empower the indentured laborers.
There must have been a divine reason why Panditji arrived in 1947, 7 days after I was born. And, there is a saying in the Vedic prayer, Tamsoma Jyotikamaya, and I believe that he came to bring some light and remove the ignorance from my mind. And I first met Panditji when I started Gujarati school at the Surat Hindu Association in Princess City.
He was more concerned about the community he was working with and starting off with Gujarati community. And then at the same time, because he studied with the Gurukul Gangadi in Haridwar, and his aim was particularly when he saw that people were not literate. Just perhaps
So living around about God Samajas from politics. And we got this house and everything. His Swami Dhanananda, a name Surti, Samaj Surti. Sochne ki shakti thi, and parapara.
Panditji, the difference is a vision. So immediately Panditji arrives there, he sets about creating structures. Structures, and the word structure is very important. Structures with structured programs aimed at promoting and creating a succession so that through the succession, the maintenance and the perpetuation of the culture will be key.
Language is the medium through which you appreciate the culture. Panditji has played a tremendous role in all aspects of Hindu culture.
Divides the books that are set greatest level. Pandit goes a step forward and writes books like Shastra and Gita. Shastra and Gita is ritual teachings of Hindu. Shastra and Gita, because we have the Hindus, we do not have a particular text that every Hindu will subscribe to. Some may follow the Ramayana, others the Gita, so on. So Pandit then gave Navinita means the cream, Shastra, the cream of all these texts, so they included the Shastra Navinita, so that anybody could have access to the whole array of scripture and then only or focus on that particular scripture that had appeal.
Vedanta, that in itself tells you it was like he was a graduate, so Ved means the scriptures, Ved. So he studied all the four Vedas, and Alankar means a jewel.
The value system, the need today for family values, the need today for cultural values, the need today for human values cannot be overemphasized. And even if it's done so in English, the Hindi, the Sanskrit, and all of this that was been part of the vision of great leaders like Pandit, we have to remember that, honor them, and honor them by ensuring that we continue that legacy.
This Stephen has arrived, a warm welcome to you. I would like to call Vivian Vedalanda, who will introduce our guest speaker, Justice Dodi Pandit. Vivian.
Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for attending this memorial lecture. 31 years later, we call it 30-year memorial, but it's actually 31 years today that my dad, Pandit, passed away. So we really appreciate you being with us today, and we appreciate also all of you who are online. And Jody, thank you so much for coming. It's a real honor to have you. Justice Colvin. I don't think you want me to call you that. So I'll introduce Justice Colvin. He is currently a justice in the Constitutional Court of South Africa, which, as you all know, is the highest court in our land. He holds a BProc and an LLB from the University of Witwatersrand and has a long history of human rights activism. Justice Colvin has served on the board of several public interest litigation organizations, including the Legal Resources Center, the Center for Study of Violence and Reconciliation, and the Institute for Democracy in South Africa, and Article 19 based in London. Justice Colvin is a justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, serving from January 2022, having served as a judge of the High Court of South Africa. High Court of South Africa, Gauteng Division since 2011. He was also the chairperson of the South African Law Reform Commission, and prior to his appointment as a judge, Judge Colvin served as the chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission from 2002 until 2009. And before that, he actually worked and practiced as a lawyer with the Lawyer for Human Rights. So his whole history has been a history of working with human rights and law and human rights. So he's well placed to talk to us today about religious identity in a multicultural society, a constitutional perspective, because as we know in South Africa, we are a constitutional democracy. He was also, when he was the director of the Lawyers for Human Rights, during that time he was appointed by our late President Mandela to the selection panel that recommended commissioners for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we know that that was an important commission post-94 in our country. As a High Court judge, Justice Colvin presided many significant cases of constitutional significance, including the Limpopo textbooks case in which the court reprimanded the National Education Department and its Limpopo counterpart for its failure to deliver textbooks to schools in the province and handed down a structural order outlining deadlines for textbook deliveries. So this is the kind of matters and that are for the people of our country that Judge and Justice Collins has been involved in, because we all know it would be ridiculous to be able to try and have our children study if they don't have textbooks. He also wrote the judgment in the unsuccessful challenge by AFRIFON to the language policy of the University of Pretoria. So I have very great pleasure in inviting Justice Solomon to the podium to talk to us today about religion in a multicultural society. Thank you.
Well, namaste, namaste, Vanakkam, good afternoon, everybody. And firstly, my apologies for being late. I was really on time, and the only excuse I can make is that technology failed me. But when I put the GPS on, it gave me the directions, and then it said please, but it didn't want to say it right. You know, you as a lady speaking to you, and when you do it on film, all you can do is follow directions. So it'll tell you 140 meters turn right, but it won't tell you when you. And so there was a road I was supposed to turn into for Rosebank, and I missed it. And then I found video and they directed me, so my apologies. So I'm really honored to be invited to speak really in honor of a remarkable man. And I want to say a few words about him, and I want to say a few words about the topic of my race, which is not an easy topic. It's identity, religious identity, in a diverse and multicultural society such as South Africa. Now we grapple with those difficult matters. I'm also mindful that this year marks the 100th anniversary of the Aryan Samaj. I know you had formed there were various temples that had been established, but I know this year in June you had your 100th AGM celebrated. So it's a remarkable contribution that an organization such as yours has made to the lives of South Africans, just not your members, but I think the whole South African society. And so congratulations are in order. But let me start by paying tribute to someone I never got to know. But his name said so much. His first name, Nardev, means God amongst me. And his surname, Vidlanga, I always thought that Vidu is a friend of mine that goes back a long way. I thought, well, that's the surname that she probably was, well, she was born with that surname. But it was interesting how that surname was acquired. Because when, and am I allowed to refer to him as Pandit? I feel I have to first check, because that's an affectionate term that I never really knew. When Pandit was graduated from the Gurukul after he had studied the Vedas, he was allowed to take the title of Vedalanta, which means jewel of the Vedas. And he chose at that point in time to change or to use that as his surname, largely because he wanted to dissociate at least the symbolic connection between his then family surname and the past sisters. And I can imagine that at that time in India, it would be an act that required a considerable amount of courage. And he adopted that name. Like I say, I never had the opportunity of meeting him, but from what I've read about him, from speaking to his daughter, from speaking to other people associated with this organization, that it seemed that he was able to do what many of us battled to do, to imbibe the values we're exposed to and live those values seriously. so that there's no gap between, in a sense, our religious identity and the values that underpin it and how we live. And I think in his life, one was able to see a wonderful example of that, where he allowed his moral and ethical compass underpinned by his own spirituality and his own identity as a Hindu to guide his life. And in many respects, that's how he became to be characterized, and that's how he became to be known. But his life growing up in the Gurukul could not have been very easy, because I read that as a young boy, he received a letter from home. The letter informed him that his beloved mother has died. And the letter was received long after she had died and been cremated. So you can imagine a young boy receiving a letter that your mother's dead. And by the way, she's been cremated. Obviously, no opportunity to say goodbye, no opportunity to reflect on what she had meant to him. But I imagine his deep spirituality meant that he persevered and he did what he had to do and completed his studies. He came to South Africa at a critical time in our history, 1947, just before the National Party was voted into power in 1948. And he died, ironically, in 1994, when we voted for a new government. And so he lived all his life as it were in the apartheid. And I imagine, epitomized everything that was wrong about the apartheid without being a political preacher. He just lived his life, recognizing that we share a common humanity. That even though we looked different, even though we spoke different languages, even though we came from different parts of the world, we share a common humanity. And that's the way in which he lived by those values. And like I said, I didn't know him, but we met each other because an interesting thing happened when he started his career as a lecturer in Gujarati at the University of Delhi Western. That will be in January 1975, the start of the academic year. I was a first-year student at the University of Delhi in the same year. So I wondered if as we walked past each other, I wondered if I met him outside the lecture room, because I didn't, of course, tell at the time I was interested in my culture. And so, like the song goes, so near and yet so far. So it's an honor for me to be able to reflect on his life, but also on the work of the Arya Samaj. I think from the time of its formation, it took a very strong position against caste discrimination. And caste discrimination still is a scourge of our times. Despite India's constitution outlawing it, it still exists. And it perhaps demonstrates that you can have great laws and you can have a wonderful constitution like we have, but social practices that run deep take a long time. But this organization has also committed itself to addressing issues like gender-based violence, and that's commendable. Reading one of your brochures when the spiritual head of the movement was here in April this year. He visited the old prison in Kilimanjaro, where Mahatma Gandhi and the young activist Daliama was at. Just incidentally, on the personal note, my mom was also held in that prison when she was 19 years old. She had come up with women from Pretoria to protest, I think, in Albania as part of the passive resistance movement, part of the defiance campaign, and she was jailed twice for 30 days. She always said it wasn't so bad because they gave us 1 week permission. And so the leader of this organization, I suppose, identifies that beyond our religion and beyond our culture, if we can't utilize it into living a better life, into making the world a better place, then we may ask, what is its value? If its value ends there, then you can't end it. And so we do. with your family, we remember him and we thanks that he was able to live amongst us and contribute to our society. And even though he wasn't able to live through democracy, he was present at the start of the Odessa talks. And Odessa talks was the Congress for Democratic South Africa, when all of the different formations in South Africa came together to talk about what is the future of South Africa and how are we going to reach agreement. And that was a very pivotal moment in our history, because without the Odessa being successful, we would have had been living in democracy today. And Pandit was one of the religious leaders invited to deliver the opening prayer at the start of Odessa. So, in all that, I suppose the lesson is that religious and cultural organizations cannot stay from society. They don't have to be political creatures, but unless they make contact with the heartbeat of society, then they may lose their relevance. And so I'm supposed to speak to the constitution and religious identity of the multi. I don't want to bore you because it could become quite boring. But I just found, interestingly, a statistic that says 85% of the world's population belong to or are associated with some or other religion. And the four major religions in the world, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, but there are many others. And I asked myself, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I said, well, please don't take offense. I said it's a neutral fact, because that's an important statistic. But the statistic that we don't know about is how many people live according to those values. And that is more important, isn't it? I don't get good enough to wear the band of the religion, but you don't know it. And in very much the same way, 13% of the world's population are either agnostic or atheists or non-believers. I don't know that's a good or bad thing either. If those people live by the values of common humanity, if they live lives that are predicated on certain common values we have as human beings, not as religious beings, but as human beings, then that's fine as well. And so it seems to me that while religion, for many of us, is about looking for some good that exists outside of ourselves, or perhaps exists within ourselves that we have to find and discover, ultimately its importance is in how we live. And I think the late Pandit's life was about that. There wasn't a gap between what his religion and his spirituality was and what his life was. And so in our context, it's important to also understand the idea of what religion is. And it's interesting, in one of the first cases that I reported to deal with, the question of religion, Judge Sandile was at that time, the Chief Justice of South Africa, said the following. And he said, human beings may freely believe in what they cannot prove. Yet, that their beliefs are bizarre, illogical, or irrational to others, or are incapable of scientific proof, does not detract from the fact that those are religious beliefs for the purposes of enjoying the protection guaranteed in the right to freedom of religion. The believers should not be put to the proof of their beliefs or faith. And so, your belief is your personal thing, how you internalize it. And all too often we have these debates in our country that you have to prove this in order to have protection, or somehow you have to prove that. And it shouldn't be that, because it's personal to you. And so our constitution guarantees the right of freedom of religion. It also recognizes the right of religious and cultural and linguistic communities to practice their religion, their language, and their culture. But a difficult issue that arises out of all of this is that the Constitution says that these rights have to be practiced in a way that's consistent with the other provisions of the Constitution. What it really means is that in a multi-cultural multicultural, multi-religious society such as ours, there's a broader set of values that are also important. And the constitutional law will not allow people to assert their right of religion if it's in conflict with the broader values the society stands for. That's important because this organization stands for against gender-based violence. Now, you cannot allow anybody in the name of religion or in the name of culture to say that women must be treated differently and less equally than men. Even if the religion said that, the law can't allow it. Because what would then happen is that the commitment of the broader society to treating women equally will be undermined if every group would say, my religion doesn't allow it. And so, freedom of religion is important, but it must exist in particular contexts. And there have been some interesting cases that our courts have had to deal with in unpacking this. So one of the cases was a organization of Christian schools and said, we are Christian schools and we believe in what is called corporal punishment or the correction of a child. And they rely on various passages in the Bible, Proverbs and Deuteronomy that supported the idea that to punish a child with corporal punishment is acceptable. And they said, when we send our children to school, we want them to be subject to the same kind of punishment. Now, you may have your views on corporal punishment, and you may have different views from each other, and you may have different views from me. That's fine. But the law said there will be no corporal punishment in schools. And I know many teachers that I speak to say, if we only had a king, we'll sort of know something outside. But that's another debate for another day. I'm just using that as an example where the court then said, no, you can't do it because we have a greater interest in the welfare and the protection of children. And you can't allow the school in the name of religion to inflict corporal punishment. That may not be a great example because of the different views, but I chose it deliberately just to indicate to you how we have these different views. But there was another case where a member of a religious group child was critically ill, facing death, and needed blood transfusion. The parents said, no, we're not giving permission for blood transfusion because we belong to a particular sect of Christianity. And the CEO of the hospital went to court and said, look, if this child doesn't receive a blood transfusion, this child will die. And the court said, well, we have to give an order compelling and allowing the hospital to, because the hospital couldn't do it without consent. Either the parents, but the parents' consent was not given, the consent had to come from someone else. And the consent came from the court, and the court said, we will not, we can't do that. It would be different, I imagine, if the parents said, we don't want a transfusion for ourselves, then we said, well, you're adults and you can make that choice, and that's your choice. But there have been more interesting and difficult examples as well, and where the courts have really said, we can't judge and make value judgments on religion. And we can't say this religious belief is a genuine belief and this is not a genuine belief, because courts are not in a position to do that. So there was a case of a young woman working in a hotel, and she had dreamt that her ancestor had come to and said to her that you have to be trained as a Sangoma. And these were dreams that she had, and this was the important calling that she had to respond to. And if she didn't respond to it, she would be acting in conflict with her own values and her own culture and her own religion. But it also impacted on her health if she didn't undertake this. And she had taken some leave from work that she asked for a short period of leave on an unpaid basis. And the company refused, and she was fired. And the case came to court, and it was interesting because what the court said is that perhaps courts are in a position to understand conventional medicine. But when someone speaks about a belief like that, a subjective belief, then court should not be asked to judge whether the belief is correct or not. but rather whether the belief is sincerely held. And if it's sincerely held, the person should be allowed the space. And I'm not saying it would apply in every case. Maybe someone wanted 6 months to leave without a court who said it's unreasonable because that will impact on the operations. But it's just the principle that is important there. And you would have also known the case of Mr. Lake in this province who wanted to wear a rosary to school. My guy would call it Mukati. I think that's the Tamil name, yeah. But it was very interesting in that case because there was evidence that it was part of perhaps the cultural identity of the group, but it wasn't necessarily part of any religious rite, nor was it compulsory. It was optional. Not everybody is obliged to do that. But again, Chief Judge from London, who delivered the judgment, said that didn't matter whether it was compulsory or not. If it was sincerely held to believe and could be accommodating. And so in the South African context, there's been really an attempt to accommodate, in a sense, the diversity of who we are. Interestingly, India battles with these same issues. So there were 2 cases in India, 3 cases. The one case was where temples wanted to refuse Dalits. You know, Dalits are what is known as the untouchables, refused Dalits to be allowed into temples. But the difficulty they ran into is that the law in most states in India say, well, if the Hindu temples have to be open to all. And these groups then, both in the north and in a very large temple in the south, the Sabri Lake Temple, trying to get around it and said, we are unique sects. We are not Hindu. So that they can try to escape from the law. In both cases, the court said, no. It sort of attempted to define Hinduism as broad, family and church are of different faiths and different sort of groupings within it. And in both those cases, the court said, no, you can't do that. So I suppose the message that comes out of both how the courts dealt with in South Africa and how the courts dealt with elsewhere is that as important as religion and culture is, it must function within a society that recognizes the existence of other claims and other values. And certainly in the South African context, our constitution speaks about the values of equality, human dignity, human rights. And I think religious and cultural organizations have come to recognize that even their claims to religious freedom and to their religious identity exist within this space. And I don't think that's a unreasonable or unjustifiable limitation of their rights. I don't know about you, but I would think that in South Africa, religious and cultural freedom is on a good footing. I can't think that there's any direct state interference. I'm not aware of religious organizations have to be registered. You may need to be registered if you want to give a tax deduction level. But if you don't want to, you can form a voluntary organization and you can pray, worship, believe as you like. And it's interesting because in 2004, I had to be part of a group, United Nations study that produced a report on cultural liberty. And I just want to read to you a brief extract from the report in describing how important this is, but also the dangers that come with it. And it said cultural liberty is a vital part of human development because being able to choose one's identity, who one is, without losing respect of others or being excluded from other choices is important in living a full life. People want freedom to practice their religion openly, to speak their language, to celebrate their ethnic or religious heritage without fear or ridicule or punishment or diminished opportunity. People want the freedom to participate in society without having to slip off their chosen cultural wording. It is a simple idea, but profoundly unsettling. And this raises just two little issues for me. And one is the question of our identity. And people often say, well, this is my identity, and it comes into conflict with other claims to my identity. I suppose you being present here means that you associate yourself with the vision of the Arab Samaj. Many of you are from Hindu, and your identity as an Hindu is an important part of who you are. And identity is really a makeup of various components. Our mental, personal, physical, social, all those characteristics that define uniquely who we are. And I think it's hard to be able to say that one has a single component of your identity. Your identity is made up of various facets. So, in this hall, for example, there are men and women. There are people from different professions. There are people who are Hindu, and there are people who may not be Hindu, and people who may not believe. And so all those little components make up your identity. And therefore, it's not as if your identity as a Hindu comes into conflict with your identity as a South African. It shouldn't automatically be a conflictual situation, because identities exist in a multifaceted way. And the very same United Nations report recognizes the idea that we can have multiple identities. And perhaps the most beautiful way of describing it is to reflect on the words of someone called Stephen King, who wrote a book on brown fishing. And this is what he said about brown fisher. He said he came out of Afrikaner nationalism, but he died belonging to all South Africa. He never saw this as a betrayal of Afrikaner identity, but rather as its fulfillment, its extension towards the true meaning of the name African. And I'd like to think that even as we sit here, 160 years after the ancient labels arrived here, that our story, our individual story, the story of our communities, the story of our country, has been about identity, about its retention, about its extension. And it's never just been about one. And when this lecture is held in another 20 years' time, the people who attend it will be the same like we are, but they'll be different. Just as we are the same like those who attended this lecture 20 years ago, but we're different. And so we shouldn't sort of have a paranoia about this thing about our identity. It's evolving, it's dynamic, it changes all the time. And you see young South Africans who embrace certain aspects of their culture and who fuse Bharatanatyam dancing with traditional Zulu dancing in a dance form that's beautiful. Certainly, many people who lived long before us wouldn't have thought that was possible. Would have thought that would be offensive because it would be sort of almost diluting identity, but it isn't, and there's no threat to it. It lives, it thrives, it survives. And so, the United Nations report said it's a simple idea, but it's also only unsettling. And why is this idea of identity and cultural liberty also unsettling? Well, it's unsettling for a number of reasons, and a number of reasons exist today. Today, unfortunately, I think we live in a world where religious identity can both be a source of good, but also a source of great conflict. And it was Rabbi Shearer, Rabbi in the United States, who famously said, the greatest crimes committed against religion are the crimes committed in the name of religion. And he wondered, because it almost beggars belief that all the major religions of the world claim that they share common values. That even though their practices may be different, that they share common values. And you wonder how, if those common values are sincerely shared, how is there so much violence and aggression committed in the name of religion? And there's an inconsistency there. I don't think the problem is religion. I think the problem is the way in which religion is asserted, the way some choose to interpret it, and the way sometimes religious freedom becomes religious primacy. And it's almost like there's a God of the world. Who's God is stronger? I wonder what the gods themselves would have to say about it. And so that is an area of concern. There's also concern, and you see it all the time. I get it on my phone, of groups who want to advance the discourse of a certain aggressive religion. And I have debates with family, with friends who are very much involved in religion, less so than I am. And they say, well, it's about it. I said, well, it is about pride. But must it be about, in a sense, you carrying your religion on your sleeve and asserting it aggressively? I was never brought up that way. But some people say, well, it may be necessary. I don't know. You can debate that. But it's important just to read what Mahatma Gandhi had to say. He said, I swear by my religion, I will die for it. But it is my personal faith. The state has nothing to do with it. The state will look after your secular welfare, health, communication, foreign relations, currency, and so on, but not my religion. That is everybody's personal concern. And it is, isn't it? I mean, how you believe and how you communicate with the power that you say exists out there is largely personal. And yet, we live in a time where both in South Africa, I would say, and in India, you see this tension rise, this tension that's based on the idea of religious primacy. And you may have some views on it. I went to India not so long ago, and I was exposed to different iterations of how people saw that. Some supported and some were concerned by what they saw happening. But I think the idea is also that social media has a tendency to exacerbate because its power to reach, its power to be acknowledged as truth. I mean, you speak to so many people, you ask them, where did you come? They say, on the internet. And that's the end of the discussion. Because if it's on the internet, it's true. And so I found somewhere, and I think some of the material you sent me very interesting, very extensible. And it says, it goes by the phrase, principle is Vasudeva Kutumbakam. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly. And it's got different iterations, but I mean, it's drawn from the ancient texts of Vedas, survived for thousands of years, but its language and its message today is powerful one. One earth, one family, one future. And I know you're religious, but it almost reminds you of the John Lennon song Imagine. Except in that song it says, what is it? Imagine there was no God, no hell, no country to die for, something like that. And so on the same theme, I did a fascinating article written by a chap called Subir Salam in the Indian Express. And it was written in April this year. I didn't find this myself, but I was speaking at the memorial for the late Ashwin Tripathi in Johannesburg. And one of the speakers made reference to it, and I asked him, he said, where did you find this? He said, I'll send you the article, which he did. In fact, he's the executive director of the Qatar Foundation, so he shot out and much of it. But it was very interesting in this article because what Subir Saran writes about is he witnesses sort of intersectional violence across the world, in India, in the United States, and elsewhere. And the heading of his article is from 1984 to now, why humanity must come before identity. And this is what he says. It says, my family taught me real religion doesn't divide. It doesn't loot, it doesn't lynch, it forgives, it heals, it accepts. It acknowledges that in every orchid there are nothing fruit, but trees still give shade. That our humanity is the thread and everything else temporarily important, beautiful, but not the fabric itself. And he goes on to say, we've worshipped flags, but forgotten the hands that sew them. Even stopped kneeling to gods and started kneeling to stones. We no longer ask why, we just obey. And that obedience has turned natives. Obedience without reflection is not faith. It is fear, it is control. When religion forgets the beating heart, the thinking brain, the dreaming soul, and demands that we belittle others for loving differently, praying differently, dressing differently, it is no longer religion, it is a leash. It's often worse, but it's not an indictment of everyone here, it's just to get us to think about where we are. I think I should be concluding now, but let me conclude on a little personal story. So I grew up in a place called Nardev in Victoria, where we sort of lived in a communal yard, and all faiths and all religions lived and existed. Even if you didn't want to celebrate Christmas or Eid, you had to, because the neighbors lived so close to you that there was a joke that the walls were so thin you could actually hear your neighbors change their minds. But anyway, I visited Palestine some years ago, and on my first visit, I was invited by, well, it wasn't the South African ambassador, because South Africa doesn't have an embassy in Palestine, they have a representative, and I had a free day. He said, send the card to get you, and you can go wherever you like to go, you have a day free. So I said, fine. So he came to Bethlehem, and I said, where would you like to go? And I said, I'd like to go to Bethlehem, because I want to see where Jesus was born. And so he took me off to Bethlehem, and went to Bethlehem, and see where Jesus was born. And coming back, we drove back to Jerusalem, and I said, I want to go to the old city of Jerusalem. And so when Jesus was crucified, he walked through the 13 stations of Christ, and it's called the Via del Rosai. And I walked the 13 stations. Said after that, I said, I want to go to the Wailing Wall where Jewish people pray. I went to the Wailing Wall and watched people pray. And finally, I went to Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa is the third most important site for Muslims, third most important mosque, and I went to Al-Aqsa. And so we drive back to the hotel, and as we get to the hotel in Moscow, he says, can I ask you a question, please, sir? He says, today, I took you to the most important religious place in the world, Muslim, Christian, Jew. Which one is yours? So I said to him, all of them, and but he didn't understand it. And then I explained to him, I said, I'm a Hindu, and I showed you that I'm Hindu. Not that I need to show you, but he did this, and he was terribly upset. He thought I'd wasted my not his day. And he said, I'm taking you shopping. I'm taking you to nice places. But perhaps he didn't understand also that perhaps that I, Nick Vasiri, come from a society and come from a culture where we see this as quite normal. And I didn't think that they sort of made me diminish me as a Hindu, if one could be diminished. In fact, if anything, I thought it just made me a better human being, because I was able to go to 3 places. I mean, if there was a temple, there would have gone, but I didn't ask, I just assumed. I don't think the temples in Jerusalem. There may be, maybe house temples, I don't. Just so that it enriches your life. And I think if you're open to that kind of experience, it can be truly wonderful. So I'd like to end by congratulating you on the wonderful work you do. I think we live in a difficult time in South Africa, where you feel a sense that our society is fractured, that it's in need of healing, that we have a sense of what we need to do, and what we must look like. But perhaps we're not quite sure what we need to do to move from here to there. And in times of uncertainty, in times of insecurity, the natural tendency is that we just pull together and we say, forget about everybody else, let us. That's natural, but this is the time when we need to be South African, when we need to reach out and need to be of the process that must build and heal the country. So we do, and the organization, congratulations once again on the 100th anniversary, and thank you very much for listening to me. Yeah, I'll stop. Thank you.
So much. This is really development. That was really something very different. We are very sure that we allow questions or it's not for the house. If anybody wishes to, that we have to take advantage when we have somebody of this caliber
That's
in our presence.
that's important. Is I think there's one or two judges. If I can't answer, they'll answer.
So please, people, if there's anybody wishes to explain, you can ask.
So we thought about your editorial team sitting on a panel. Were there any times that you're not very well?
Anytime you want to be good.
Very well.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's some judges who quite enjoy it. But I don't think one can. Because in a sense, I suppose that I don't have an idea of, well, I think we have an idea of God's sense of justice, isn't it? We're told that God is a loving God. She listens. He's compassionate. And so in that sense, if you want to take those qualities, then that's the qualities that a judge has. But unfortunately, and there's some judges here, is that the judge has to be disciplined. So you often are conflicted between your sense of what is right in a particular case, your instinctive sense of what justice calls for, but it may not always be possible in that case, because court cases are run on particular pleadings on evidence, etc. So you often find people in society say, but that person is guilty. That person is guilty. How would the judge let that person walk? But the difficulty is that the judge who sits in court, I suppose if I was God, I would say, my instinct says you're guilty and that's good enough. But because once a judge, you have to consider the evidence. And sometimes you have to reluctantly say, well, you have to be free. Even though you may be guilty, but the law requires you to prove being guilty. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the short answer.
Hi, Joe, it's Chris Wallace. I didn't answer my point of view. It's not a question, it's actually a comment. I think we've touched upon far more closer than I think that was being imagined. Because I think there's about 1.5 million people of Indian descent in South Africa. And like you said, the way you grew up in Maharashtra starts. And I think most of us here, your generation, would say the same, that we grew up in integrated communities. We grew up respecting each other's faiths and practices. And in a strange way, Pandit actually kept us together. Strange way, while the group leaders had disrupted cultural practices and so on, so the mosque, churches, and temples at Riverside and Clarewood, or District 6, was highly traumatic. But when people got together in Lens or in Chatsworth or in Phoenix, they actually came together again. It took a long time, obviously, to rebuild community relationship bond. In a strange way, after apartheid, the demise of apartheid, the rise of democracy, we now developing sub-identities in our own community. So there's religious tensions emerging, and I think being a judge, you address it very tactfully. And you got sub-identities, so I may be Tamil, and someone is Hindi or Gujarati or Islamic faith. But the reality is we also start dividing a minority community. In a society where this non-racial dream is collapsing very fast. And last week I had the privilege of being in the national dialogue and trying to imagine where we may go. And that's a highly fragmented process. But we're trying to get some glue to restitch our society. And one platform that can get us there is the faith sector, because as you said, 85% of the world believe in a faith. In our country, according to the census, 94% actively religious, of which 83% are Christian and speak and they interfaith forum. And I tell my colleagues that there's a greater responsibility on the part of the church. So I think the faith sector has an important role to play, and we're going to make sure that we do it in a way that's not divisive. And I think that message got to go forward, and I hope that your speech is circulated very widely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I would generally agree with those sentiments. But I also have an observation to make post 1994. And certainly in the community in China, that the community has become more fragmented because people have almost sought to assert their religious and cultural identities much more strongly. So when I went to school, we all went to the same school. And after school, some kids would go to madrasa, other kids would go to Tamil school, other kids would go to Islamic school, etc. But we all went to the same school. And so we were able to socialize as kids, play football together, etc. But now, in the name of religious freedom, you have a multitude of religious schools. And I see how this unfolds. And you have a right to establish those schools. But it's almost inevitable that when kids go to that school, but that part of their identity is extenuated. After school, they will play with kids from those schools. I mean, they even have soccer tournaments now, based on your religion. I mean, you can't see the connection between religion and soccer skills. And yet you have soccer tournaments or other social events, professional groups based on religion. And so I worry about that, because the risk of that is that in the name of cultural and religious freedom, we sleepwalk our way to segregation.
Amen. Namaste, everybody. It's memorial lectures, but I think we're going to be very quickly that if we address this issue from the perspective of what Pandit wrote. I think, Namaste, everybody. My name is Sindhu. I just want to say that with Chief Justice, your address on religion and its place in our society and our constitution, and this being Pandit Nardev's memorial lecture, I think it's very fitting that we look at something that Pandit himself wrote for this very organization. In the little video presentation earlier on, we saw Dr. Ramila speaking about Pandit's work, and one of the books is Shastra and Nardev, Pandit's manual. It's a book, I think, if you study English scriptures worldwide in the English medium, which is one of the final books that describes the That's my spectrum of religious spectrum, scriptures. It's also one of the science books that we studied in Bearing itself. And going back, I see Sanjay and Rashida here as well. In our party of our days, just prior to 1994, when the League was making submissions to the Constitution or development of the Constitution of the country, one of the texts that we referenced was Shastra Navneetam and the section on Vedic Samaj Bhav. And if anybody wants to have good insight into what Hindus says about our society from our textbook, it's in Vedic Samaj Bhav, Shastra Navneetam, book that Pandit wrote in this country, in this organization. I think it should be compulsory even for all Hindus who want to talk about the role of religion in this space in our society and our political space. I think it is a wonderful piece in that text that he covers a few suttas from the first section of the Vedas that describes and discusses polity, value systems, and Hindu governments. I just thought it's very important to mention that in light of this theme and the fact that he's one of Pandit's writings. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lucinda. Thank you, sir, for your lovely presentation. I now call upon Pandit Reshma Ramados to give the presentation.
You. You can't deny us. Just face us. You hold the passport. And that's fine. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the tail end of our program. I have the pleasant task of moving the vote of thanks. So this very special program has been made special with many happy inheritors. And my pleasant task on behalf of Adi Samaj of South Africa is to convey our appreciation for the support and assistance it needs to make the successful completion. Our sincere gratitude to Justice Flory Culligan for your insightful speech. Thank you, sir. Thank you to Vidhu Vivekananda for introducing our guest speaker. Thank you, Mr. Raj Ram Prasad is not here today, but he set up the sound, so thank you for that. Our administrative staff for the setup and the effective management of live stream. Mr. Vikram Vedananda for capturing this evening's function. Gratitude to the office staff for setting up of the mandir and handling all future matters. We sincerely thank all of you who have taken the time to be present with us today, both physically and online. And lastly, a big thank you to all those individuals who have worked hard behind the scenes and contributed in any way in the planning of this event. Our sincere apologies if anyone has been omitted. We are immensely grateful for all of your contributions. As we prepare to conclude with our closing prayer, please may I request that when we are finished with the Shanti Pant, that we allow our guests to please leave the mandate first, and thereafter we will proceed to the dining area of the supper space. Please ask everyone to rise. We will do the midnight prayer and Shanti Pant. So we will all do that together. Everybody knows the mantras. Om Navade Anasya No Shishmiraha प्रप्रदाकारं दारिश भुजन्नो देहि बिल्वते च पुष्पदे ॐ न्योषान्त्यन्तरिक्षं शान्तिः पृथिवी शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधय शान्तिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्विश्वे देवाः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिः सर्वं शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः सामा शान्तिरेधि ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Please you join us for dinner. Have a safe trip home. Allow our guests to leave. And you may give the sleep so that we enjoy. Thank you.
Take a quick picture. Yes. Here.